we were discussing elitist theory of democracy. And in that context, we had discussed the views of some of the experts. We had discussed the views of Pareto, Mosca, Messrs, Schumpeter, Menhem. These are the scholars whose view we have already discussed. What actually we had discussed, there may be slight variation here and there in the views of the different scholars when they talk about the elitist theory of democracy. But the point that we need to understand in all these theories, we find one thing very common, and that common thing is that in democracy, it is not possible for the people to exercise power directly. Right? So in every democracy, and not only in democracy, in every form of government, what you find is that the selected group of elite, they actually exercise power. And we have also discussed the concept of circulation of elite. One group of elite comes to power. There is a competition among different group of elites, and one group of elites comes into power. It competes with another group of elite, and in the next election, maybe probably some other group of elite will come to power. But virtually, power in democracy, or for that matter, in any form of government, is virtually enjoyed by a limited number of people. All right. So they are exercising power. So this is what explains the elitist theory of democracy. This is basically a contemporary theory of democracy, and before that, we had discussed the classical theory of democracy. All right. Now, one more viewpoint I will take up now, while continuing with the elitist theory of democracy, and that is the viewpoint of Sartori, S-A-R-T-O-R-I, Sartori, a renowned scholar of political science, Sartori. What he's trying to explain, he says that democracy is basically a procedure. What kind of procedure? It's a procedure in which a group of elite leaders belonging to different groups, they compete for getting the political power. So what Sartori is saying not different from the others, but he's saying that democracy is basically a procedure in which leaders, they compete in election for getting the authority to govern. What he's saying is that there would be competition. So what kind of system, what kind of procedure is democracy? Democracy is a procedure, according to Sartori, in which a group of leaders, okay, they would compete. There would be competition among the different elite groups, and to get the people's support, to get the people's vote, and when they get the people's vote, this means they have got the authority to govern. Right? So that is precisely what explains the elitist theory of democracy as what Sartori is trying to explain. Sartori says that the role of elite class is not a contradiction in democracy. When I had started, I said that looking into elitist theory of democracy, what we find is that it looks like there is a contradiction between two words. One is elitism, which means selected few, they are exercising power, and democracy means power of the people. So I had said earlier that it looks like a contradiction between elitism and democracy. All right. And I had also said that elitist theory of democracy is a beautiful amalgamation of elitism and democracy. All right. Now, Sartori is not seeing any kind of contradiction. He says there is no contradiction in elitist theory of democracy. Why? Because the role of elite class is a core of the democratic system. What he's saying is that the role played by the elitists, this is a core of democracy. Right? Because why he's saying it is a core of democracy? Why elitism is a core of democracy? Because option of self-rule is like an illusion. It is not possible. It says option of self-rule is an illusion. So what happens usually in democracy? You find people exercise power. It means democracy, a form of government in which people rule themselves. But self-rule concept, Sartori says, is not a fact. It is an illusion. It is an illusionary concept. All right. Why? He says government is basically a business by competent leaders. Sartori is saying it is only the competent people, and they can do the business of governance. So the business of governance, business of government and business of governance belongs to whom? It belongs to the competent leaders. It is only the competent leaders, and everybody cannot be competent. All right. So it is only the competent leaders that is trying to justify the elitism. It's trying to justify the elitist theory of democracy by saying that not everyone is competent, and government is a business of the competent people. All right. So people use the right to vote, all right, to give power. Okay, to give power to the group of elite to exercise rule over them. So if the people, they participate in the election and the process of election is free and fair, and after that, if a group of elites rules over them, there is nothing wrong in it. The only thing that is required is people should be selecting the rulers. All right. Now, what Sartori is saying, he's saying that it goes to the extent of saying that real threat to democracy comes not from the leadership. Means real threat to democracy doesn't come from the elite, doesn't come from the leaders. It basically comes from a sense of leadership. This is how he's trying to explain. He says the real threat to democracy is not from the leaders, not from the elites, but real threat to democracy would be there when there is absence of elites, when there is absence of leaders. So this is precisely what Sartori is trying to explain. So with you find a lot of similarity in the views of different scholars when they try to explain elitist theory of democracy. Right. Depending on the question that you are asked, if you are asked a question on elitist theory of democracy, not necessarily you should explain the views point of each and every scholar. See, basically, if the question is on elitist theory of democracy, then you can take the views of 2 or 3 scholars, not more than that. You should not exceed your limit. You should not exceed the word limit. So since you have to write an answer in 200 or 250 words, kindly stick to that. And very, very briefly, just one paragraph of 3 to 4 lines on each theorist you can mention. All right. Now, talking about, just wait for a minute. The power is gone, but it will come. Talking about the criticism of elitist theory of democracy, what we find is that elitist theory of democracy is basically, when we look into the criticism of elitist theory of democracy, it said that it distorts the fundamental characteristic of democracy. Now, what is the fundamental characteristic of democracy? The fundamental characteristic of democracy is people's empowerment of people's sovereignty and people's participation. The two most fundamental ingredients of democracy is people's participation, number one, and second is people's sovereignty. But when you talk about elitist theory of democracy, neither you find a true way of people's participation except the election, except in the process of election. And secondly, there is no people's sovereignty. It is the sovereignty of the elite. All right. So when we discuss the criticism of elitist theory of democracy, the first point that comes into our mind is that elitist theory of democracy is a distortion of the fundamental characteristics of democracy. And what are the fundamental characteristics of democracy? They are people's sovereignty and people's participation in the governance process. So neither of the two you will find them. All right. Now, another important point, if we consider elitist theory of democracy to be true, if we consider elitist theory of democracy to be perfect theory, it means public has no voice in the government and governance. So this is a complete distortion. If you consider elitist theory of democracy to be a true theory of democracy, to be a perfect theory of democracy, this means people will have no voice in government and the governance process. That is why I said that it is basically the elitist theory of democracy is the distortion of the concept of democracy. This is the first criticism, right? The second criticism of elitist theory of democracy, that it converts the rule of people into the rule by elite. We say democracy is government of the people, for the people, and by the people. That is as defined by, as described by Abraham Lincoln, which is the truest definition of democracy. But what happens? Elitist theory of democracy converts the rule of people into rule of elite. All right. So this is the second criticism. So rule of people is not there. Rule of people is absent, and in its place, what we have established is the rule of elite. Right. Means what I'm trying to make you understand is democracy without active participation of the people is no democracy at all. So two things are essential. One, somehow we should be able to maintain people's sovereignty in democracy. And secondly, we need to ensure people's participation. If it is not there, then this is no democracy at all. All right. And the last point I would like to mention when we are discussing the criticism of validity of democracy, that it virtually converts representative democracy into elected autocracy. This is the most serious criticism, and we have seen if there has been a slide down of the Indian democracy, if there is a slide down in the ranking of Indian democracy, it is primarily because of the fact that those who are elected to power, okay, those who are elected to power, they decide the matters in an autocratic manner. All right. So it converts representative democracy into an elected autocracy. Why? Because only few people decide the issues related to government. Okay. So this is the criticism about elitist theory of democracy. Now, the second theory, or important theory that we pick up when we, in context of the contemporary theory of democracy, we'll be looking into the pluralist theory of democracy. So far, we have been discussing elitist theory of democracy, and the second theory is pluralist theory of democracy. Pluralist theory of democracy can fall into two separate categories. One would be elitist democratic theorist. Because in elitist theory of democracy also, there is a reference of a group of elite. You try to understand. So we can find an element of pluralism. We can find an element of plurality even in the elitist theory of democracy, because it is a group of elite. All right. So different group of elite, they compete for political power. For example, if you consider Congress to be a one group of elite, if you consider BJP to be another group of elite, if you consider CPI and CPIM to be another group of elite, if you consider the regional parties to be another group of elite, so what we find is that even in elitist theory of democracy, there is an element of pluralism. There is an element of plurality. So in first category, when we talk about pluralist theory of democracy, we would be taking into account the existence of a group of elite, a group of political parties, and one political party or elite belonging to one political party, they exercise power. All right. So elitist theory of democracy has two categories, and first category is a group of elite belonging to one political party. They exercise the political power. All right. And the most important protagonists of this point of view were Menhem, Manhnheim. Menhem we have already discussed. So Menhem, and another was Raymond Aron, Aron. Raymond, Raymond, and Raymond Aron. So these two were the elitist. These were the elitist democratic theorists who believed in existence of a group of elite competing for political power. But the second category is most important for us when we discuss pluralist theory of democracy. That is a group theorist. They're called group theorists, which consider that democracy is a process of bargaining among different autonomous groups existing in society or existing within the state. See, there are different groups existing within society. There are the trade union groups, okay? There are the business, there are the group of industrialists, there are the group of traders, there are the group of the corporates. So in any state, in any society, there would be existence of different groups. All right. And the existence of different groups makes the society very plural. So why it is considered as a part of a theory of democracy? Why? Because according to there are, for example, we'll be talking about certain names, A.F. Bentley. But before I discuss his theory, let me first explain what is the pluralist theory of democracy. That it believes in existence of different groups, and the groups are by and large autonomous. All right, they exist and they provide a democratic character to the society. They provide a democratic character to the policies. So different group of elites existing together, right? And coexistence of different groups belonging to different areas, belonging to different professions, and they have a say. They have a say in the sense they influence the decision-making process of the government. For example, defense manufacturer United States of America, they have a larger say in what decision is taken by the US president. Again, the industrialist United States of America or the corporate United States of America. Basically, I'm talking in terms of existence of different pressure groups in United States of America and other countries. All right. For example, farmers lobby in India. For example, trade unions lobby in India. For example, the industrialist lobby in India. Now you tell me whether the group of industrialists, whether the group of corporates, they have say in the governance of our country or not. How much is the influence of the leaders like of the corporates like Ambanis and Adanis on the government? So what political theory of democracy would explain that there would be existence of different autonomous associations and groups within the society, and they exercise power, they exercise influence over the government. This means government is not sovereign in true sense of the term. Government cannot take a decision without consulting the different groups. Right. So this is considered to be a mainstream pluralist theory of democracy. Now, when I would be explaining the views of different scholars, the thing would be more clear. All right. Now, the first one I would like to explain is A.F. Bentley, B-E-N-T-L-E-Y, A.F. Bentley. All right. Now, A.F. Bentley, he wrote a book, and the title of the book is The Process of Government. The Process of Government, the book he wrote in 1908. Right. And there is another scholar, David Truman. David Truman, he wrote a book, The Governmental Process, and that book was written in 1951. So two books I have referred. One, The Process of Government, 1908, written by Bentley, and another book, David Truman, written by the title of the book is The Governmental Process, written in 1951. Now, both these scholars, Bentley and Truman, they have interpreted democracy as a political game. What is a democracy? According to Bentley and David Truman, that democracy is a political game, all right, played by variety of groups. All right, so there are different variety of groups existing in society. All right, and these groups, they exercise a lot of influence in government and the governance process. All right. So Bentley and Truman, they are saying is that democracy is basically a political game played by different groups. All right. How they're trying to explain this? See, they said that government and the process of governance is basically a focal point of public pressure. How much pressure is exerted by one particular group, or how much pressure is exerted by different political groups, on that is based the decision of the government. All right. And the main task of the government, according to Bentley and David Truman, the main task of the government is to reflect the highest common group demand. What is the main task of the government? Main task of the government is to reflect the highest group demand. Now, what do I mean when I'm saying the highest group demand? Let me explain this concept. See, there will be different groups existing in society. Right? Now, when the government comes out with the policy and the decision, what do? They try to find out what is common in all the groups. What is the common demand? What is the common demand of all the groups? All right. So that is why it is said government is the focal point of public pressure, and the main task of the government is to reflect the highest common group demand. Means there are 10 groups, for example, 10 influential groups from 1 to 10. So whatever is the common demand in all the groups, that point will be undertaken by that policy will be undertaken by the government. This is what is the viewpoint of Bentley and Truman. All right. Now, so democratic society according to Bentley and Truman, democratic society is basically a pluralist society. Democratic society is basically a pluralist society, and it is a, they use the term pluralist differentiated society. Now, why differentiated? Differentiated because there is existence of different groups. Why pluralist? Why? Because when government comes out with decision, they take decision while keeping in mind the common interest. What is common in what is of common interest among all the existing groups. All right. Now, so management of public affairs is basically shared by a number of groups. They have a different values, they have a different sources, they have a different method of influence. All right. And they have a different way, different method of influencing the government. And ultimately, when government comes out with a decision, it is a common interest. What is of common interest in all the groups? This is a kind of interpretation. So elitist theory of democracy is also an interpretation of democracy, working of democracy, and pluralist theory of democracy is also an interpretation of the working of democracy. So neither the elitist theory would be perfect, nor the pluralist theory would be perfect. But you will find some element of truthfulness in elitist theory also and pluralist theory also. All right. Now, the most important exponent after I have described Bentley and David Truman, but the most important, much more important than Bentley and Truman, is the Robert Dahl. Robert Dahl is the most important exponent of the pluralist theory of democracy. All right. He wrote a book, if I remember it correctly, 1916. The title of the book was A Preface to Democratic Theory. The title of the book, A Preface to Democratic Theory, written by Robert Dahl. And the question that you will get from pluralist theory of democracy would be based on the Robert Dahl's viewpoint. And you will be asked to explain this. So if you get a question on pluralist theory of democracy, you cannot escape mentioning the name and mentioning the viewpoint of Robert Dahl. Robert Dahl, R-O-B-R-T-D-A-H-L. I have already explained earlier. I've already taken the name of Robert Dahl several times. Right. So, A Preface to Democratic Theory, a book written by Robert Dahl. All right. So, he develops a theory which is described as a pluralist theory of democracy, but he calls the entire concept of pluralist theory of democracy, he calls it polyarchy. Polyarchy. The term he uses is polyarchy. All right. When you say oligarchy, what you have in mind, rich few people, rich and influential few people, it is called oligarchy. All right. But when you call a polyarchy, he calls this pluralist theory of democracy a theory of polyarchy. Now, what is the meaning of polyarchy? P-O-L-Y-A-R-C-H. All right. What is the meaning of polyarchy? The meaning of polyarchy is coexistence of different groups, right, within the society, all right, and they exercise influence over the government, and the main task of the government acts as a broker. Try to understand the point. The term used by Robert Dahl is that government or the state would be working as a broker. So there would be different demands from different groups, and government would be working as a broker between the different groups when they come out with their policy. Right. What Robert Dahl is saying? He's saying that there would be existence of different groups. So there would be existence of different centers of power. Different centers of power would be existing in society. All right. Now, and the policy making process in liberal democratic society is basically decentralized. He says how much centralized power may be looking. When you find ultimately the power is basically centralized in the hand of the few leaders. But what Robert Dahl says, it may look like the power is centralized, but in fact it is not. He says that howsoever centralized the power structure of the country may be looking, but in reality, it is highly decentralized. All right. And he says that How, in what sense it is decentralized? It says that governance is basically a bargaining process among different related different autonomous groups. There are different autonomous groups existing in society, and it is basically a bargaining process. And why it calls it a bargaining process? It says that different groups, they would try to bargain their demand with the government. Try to understand the point. Different groups would try to bargain with the government. All right. Different groups would try to bargain with the government, bargain with the state regarding what? They would try to bargain about their demands. And government plays the role of a broker. All right. And when they come out with a decision, the decision that government would come out with would be dependent on which group has been able to exercise what kind of influence in the government. So whether the traders' lobby have been able to exercise influence over the government. You must have seen every year before the finance minister comes out with the budget, all right, he or she would be consulting different lobbies. He or she would be consulting different groups. They would be industrialist groups would be consulted, traders' lobby would be consulted, trade unions would be consulted. All right. So chartered accountants groups would be consulted. So there would be a consultation among different groups. All right. And what Robert Dahl is saying, it depends on how much influence a particular group is able to exert on the government. All right. And when because government is a broker, all right, and when they finally come out with the decision, and Robert Dahl uses the term. He says government is an honest broker. The term used by Robert Dahl is that government acts like an honest broker among the different groups. All right, when they come out with the politician. All right. So according to elitist theory of democracy, public policy or government decision is basically an outcome of interaction among different groups. All right. And because every group is making a claim over the government, and government plays the role of an honest broker, as I have said. All right. So, according to pluralist theory of democracy, that public policy or government decision is not a product of the elite. This doesn't come within the domain of elite. All right. So, Robert Dahl is critical of elitist theory of democracy. On the contrary, he says the decision of the government is an outcome of interaction between the different groups. So that is the difference between elitist theory of democracy and pluralist theory of democracy. All right. And I have already told you that how much influence a group will be able to exert on the government. So on that, how much influence a particular group is able to exert on the government, on that depends whether the decision is in favor of a particular group or not. All right. Now, so this is what is pluralist theory of democracy. All right. And the decision is basically an outcome of interaction among the different groups. All right. Now, coming to the point of when we talk about Robert Dahl's theory, he says intensity of strength of the group and the intensity of the participation of the group, okay, would be proportionate. Means to what extent influence a particular group is able to exercise on the government, and to what extent they are participating in the governance process or decision-making process, that would be dependent on the strength of that particular group. All right. What is important for us to understand, what Robert Dahl is saying, that policy making is neither done by the representatives in an autonomous manner, nor it is decided by the elite group on its own. Rather, policy making and policy decisions in democracy is basically an result of an outcome of interaction among the different groups. All right. So basically, he talks about the bargaining between the different groups. All right. And he talks about the role of a government as a broker between the different groups. So this is nothing but this is just an interpretation of a theory of democracy. So elitist theory of democracy is a one interpretation, and pluralist theory of democracy another interpretation. Okay. Now, so I have told you the concept, the term that is used by Robert Dahl while explaining pluralist theory of democracy is a polyarchy. But later on, he brought about some changes in his theory of polyarchy, and he used another term in his later stage of life, and he used the term deformed polyarchy. Now, when you talk about polyarchy, what is the difference between polyarchy and deformed polyarchy? And the deformed polyarchy could also be a criticism of the pluralist theory of democracy. All right. What is the meaning of deformed? Say, when you talk about polyarchy, you talk about existence of different autonomous groups, and we presume that all the groups are autonomous, and by and large, they enjoy similar power. All right. That is when we talk about the polyarchy. But when we talk about deformed polyarchy, the term which has been used by Robert Dahl himself in his later studies, what he's saying is that nowadays, and this is basically a case study based on United States of America, what Robert Dahl says, and what Robert Dahl admits and accepts, he says that deformed polyarchy means the corporate lobbyists and the defense lobbyists in United States of America, they exercise much more power than any other group. Means corporates and defense lobbyists, they exercise much more power on the US president, much more influence on the US president than any other group. So that is why he calls it a deformed polyarchy. And deformed polyarchy means equal power and equal influence is not enjoyed by all the groups. They may be autonomous, but they do not enjoy a similar kind of power and similar kind of influence. That is why he has used the term deformed polyarchy. So deformed polyarchy is a serious criticism of the pluralist theory of democracy. All right. So when you say that government and governance is the business, is basically a business of the groups, or is an outcome of interaction between the different groups who are autonomous by and large, they are not autonomous, or even if they are autonomous, they do not exercise similar kind of influence on the government. All right. Now, when we talk about, in pluralist theory of democracy, just you have to explain Bentley's view, right, Truman's view a little bit, and then you have to come down to the views of what you call you have to come to the views of Robert Dahl. Now, looking into the criticism of the pluralist theory of democracy. Right. There is a political scientist, Michael Mavgolis, M-I-C-H-A-L, Michael Mavgolis, M-A-V-G-O-L-I-S, Michael, M-I-C-H-A-L, Mavgolis, M-A-V-G-O-L-I-S, Mavgolis. He says that the major criticism of the pluralist theory of democracy is that in democratic countries, bureaucracy, they exercise many powers. They exercise dominance over the executive. They have a lot of influence on the executive. And he says, Mavgolis says that pluralist theory of democracy fails to suggest measures how to control a vast bureaucracy. You try to understand the point. See, how can you expect democracy? How can you expect the sovereignty, or how can you expect the autonomy of different groups existing within the society when bureaucracy is enjoying many powers? Bureaucracy has become very powerful in democratic countries, and there is no mechanism has been suggested by the pluralist democratic theory, by the pluralist theory of democracy, by the exponents of the pluralist theory of democracy, how to contain, how the executives or how the government would be controlling the vast power of the, because see, democracy, on what basis you call pluralist theory of democracy democracy? You call it democracy because there is existence of autonomous association and groups, and they exercise a lot of powers, or a lot of influence. Michael Mevgolis says that where is the question of autonomy or the power of the groups when bureaucracy is enjoying so much power and they take all major decisions? And pluralist theory of democracy has not suggested means how the government can control the bureaucracy. This is the first criticism. All right. Now, the second criticism against the pluralist theory of democracy is that it goes against the essence of democracy. What is the essence of democracy? Government of the people and by the people. What is the essence of democracy? Government of the people and by the people. Right? Now, this theory, pluralist theory of democracy is completely detached from the masses. There is the reference of the groups being very powerful, but nowhere there is a mention about the wishes and desires of the masses. How could masses exercise their power? How could masses exercise influence of the government? All right. So, according to the critics, this theory is completely detached from the masses. All right. So this is again a distortion of, just like the relative theory, it's also a distortion of the idea of democracy. All right. Now, again, pluralist theory of democracy basically reduces democracy into a struggle for power among the competing groups. Pluralist theory of democracy reduces democracy into a, according to the critics, it reduces democracy into a struggle for exercising power and influence among different groups. But what is the common good of the people? This aspect of common good of the people has been relegated to the background. In pluralist theory of democracy, what is pluralist theory of democracy? It is basically a struggle for exercising power and influence over the government by different groups, and in the process, the common good of the people has been relegated to the back. This is another criticism of the pluralist theory of democracy. Okay. Now, according to critics, this theory of democracy means pluralist theory of democracy, basically a status quoist theory. The status quoist theory means they believe just in maintaining the system. Okay, they just believe in maintaining the system, and nowhere there is a mention about how to evaluate the existing system. They are not talking about evaluation of the existing system. They are not trying to examine how the system is working, whether it is working in the interest of the people or not. All right. So, in democracy, changes are very essential. Changes in whose interest? Changes in the interest of the people. Changes in what context? In which context? Changes in context of changing circumstances. So no democracy would work successfully without taking into account the requirement of changes in the society. But in pluralist theory of democracy, there is no mention about evaluating how the democracies are functioning, or what are the changes that are required to be brought into the democratic process. There is no reference of that. It means this theory, pluralist theory of democracy, is nothing, but it is just about maintaining the status quo. All right. So this goes against the idea of democracy, because idea of democracy is the idea of change according to changing circumstances and according to the wishes of the people. And there is no mention of that. So this is another criticism about the pluralist theory of democracy. Right. One more criticism. The plurality dimension the plurality dimension of this theory. Plurality dimensions, and why we are, on what basis we are calling it a theory of democracy, because there is a dimension of plurality. What kind of plurality? Plurality of different groups. But even the plurality dimension of the theory of democracy seems to be an illusion. On what basis? Because only that group which is economically very powerful, and only that group which is more organized and economically more powerful, only that group would become a privileged group, and only that group would be exercising power on the government. If we try to interpret pluralist theory of democracy, whether there is a pluralist theory of democracy in India or not, or if we try to give a pluralist explanation of the working of democracy in India, what would you say? Would you agree? Would you believe that the similar kind of power and influence is exercised by the farmers' lobby, the traders' lobby, industrialists' lobby, or any other lobby? The answer is no, big no. So the critics say that plurality dimension of the theory itself is an illusion, because only that group would be exercising more power, which is more organized, which is economically more resourceful. So that group would become a privileged group, and that group would be controlling the government, and that group would be influencing the government. All right. And they would not be only controlling the government, they would also be controlling the decisions of the government. In that context, again, we can refer to the deformed polyarchy. No, deformed polyarchy means there is no equality of power among different groups, and only the group which is more powerful, more organized, more resourceful, more wealthy, only that group would be exercising power and influence on the government. All right. So even the plurality dimension of the pluralist theory of democracy is nothing but just an illusion. So these are the criticism of the pluralist theory of democracy. So in context of the contemporary theory of democracy, we have discussed two important theories: relativist theory of democracy and pluralist theory of democracy. Again, try to understand. When we discuss the concept of power at a later stage, maybe tomorrow, when we discuss the concept of power, in power theory, in power also, you will find elitist theory of power and the pluralist theory of power. And you will find the same scholar's name. So don't get confused. So at that point of time, when I discuss elitist theory of power and pluralist theory of power, I will not be going into details. I will just be defining the concept, because whatever we have studied, similar thing would apply there also. So if you are asked a question on elitist theory of power, pluralist theory of power, meaning it one and the same. All right. Now, coming into now the Marxist theory of democracy, or people's theory of democracy. The Marxist theory of democracy is also known as people's theory of democracy or people's democracy. I would not be going into detail, it is not required here. When we discuss Karl Marx, you would come to know. So there is a topic Marxism, there is a topic Marxian political thought, and the Marxian view of democracy. One and the same. So when we discuss that, so I'm not going into much detail now. I'll just be referring to the Marxist theory of democracy. Let us try to understand. See, Karl Marx has explained, first of all, Karl Marx he did not believe in any democracy, because it is an capitalist idea. So Karl Marx did not believe in any theory of democracy. But yes, he had given an interpretation, given an explanation of the working of the capitalism, and that itself becomes an explanation of his theory of democracy. But there is no direct reference of the theory of democracy by Karl Marx. Karl Marx did not believe in any kind of democracy, all right? Because he looks into the idea of capitalist democracy from the point of view of class paradigm. You know, class paradigm means what? It says that societies always get divided into two classes: the haves and the have-nots. All right. And he says the idea of democracy is nothing but an idea of capitalism. Idea of democracy is nothing but an idea of, but it's not the rule of people. It's a democracy is not the rule of people. Democracy is basically ruled by the capitalist class. And they are exercising rule over what? They are exercising rule over the working class. So democracy, according to Karl Marx, is nothing but an exercise of power by the capitalist class over the working class. So he looks into the concept of democracy from the class paradigm or from the class perspective. All right. So society would always get divided into two classes: rulers and the ruled, exploiters and exploited. Okay, they would be known by different names. Some places they would be called masters and the slaves in the earlier society. Later on, they would be known as feudal lords. They would be known as feudal lords and serfs. Later on, they would be known as capitalists and the workers. So in every society gets converted into two classes. All right. So talking about democracy, more detail when we discuss Marxian political thought, not private. All right. Now, so basically, what Karl Marx is trying to explain that executive means the government. In modern state democracy, they serve the interest of the liberal capitalist class. Democratic democracies, they serve the interest of the capitalist class. So democracy is nothing but a rule, a system of government that facilitates the interest of the capitalist class, nothing more than that. All right. He calls liberal democracy. He says it is no democracy in the real sense of the term. What the liberals they are referring to democracy, according to Karl Marx, is no democracy at all. He says it is because why? Democracy means people's power. Democracy means empowerment of the people. All right. Democracy means a society where there is no inequality. Real democracy is one where there is equality, where there is no widening gap between rich and poor. But capitalist democracy or liberal democracy is not democracy in true sense of the term. Rather, it is highly undemocratic. And why it is undemocratic? Because democracies, they perpetuate existing inequality in society. All right. And the capitalist class, they exercise, because capitalist class, they belong to the haves, and the masses, they belong to the have-nots. And the capitalist class, they exercise power over the working class. All right. They exercise not only the power, they are exercising ownership power. They are using exploitative power over the working class. So democracy, according to Karl Marx, liberal democracy according to Karl Marx is nothing but an instrument of exploitation in the hands of the capitalist class, who use their power to exercise the control over the working class. All right. Now, so democracy is nothing but a form of government, okay, in which representation of the people is just an illusion. Karl Marx says the representative aspect of democracy, which liberals have been talking about, they are nothing but just an illusion. Why it is an illusion? Because people are totally powerless. Why it is an illusion? Because there is no equality in society. There is high level of inequality in society. So how can a society be democratic when there is a widening disparity and widening inequality in society? This is what is the opinion of Karl Marx. All right. Now, so according to Marxian thinkers, true democracy means people's empowerment. All right. True democracy can exist only in classless and stateless society. Try to understand the point. What Karl Marx is saying, that true democracy can exist only in society which is classless and stateless. There is no class. There is no state, because state is an instrument of exploitation in the hands of the bourgeois class. This is what Karl Marx says. All right. So state and democracy is nothing but an instrument of exploitation. All right. So democracy would be possible only in a classless society. Means where there is no working class, there is no bourgeois class, there is no capitalist class, and there is a classless society. Everybody is having the same kind of status. It says democracy, Karl Marx would say that democracy would be possible only when everybody is producing according to his capacity and getting according to his need. This is the democracy. All right. So This means Marxian thinkers, they believe in equality of outcome. They do not believe only in equality of opportunity. They believe, see, the liberal democratic thinkers, when talking about democracy, when talking about justice, could say that our job is done if there is equal opportunity for everyone. All right. But Marxian thinkers would not believe in equality of opportunity. Rather, they would be believing in equality of outcome. So equality of outcome is more important. And what is that outcome? They say that true democracy would be possible only when everybody produces according to his capacity, all right, and gets according to his need. That is precisely the point. That is the real democracy, all right. So basically, the liberal democracy is they put focus on procedural aspect of democracy. This is the difference, all right. But Marxian thinkers, they give focus on substantive aspect of democracy. I have explained earlier, and you have to use the same kind of information. The difference between substantive justice and procedural justice. Try to understand the point. So this is the same difference would be applying when we talk about when we compare the liberal democracy and Marxian democracy. Liberal democracy is procedural democracy. They believe in certain procedure. And what is that procedure? The procedure is you should have a system of election and people should be freely participating in that election and they would be electing the rulers. Your job of democracy is done. So they do not believe in equality of outcome. But Marxian democracy believes in equality of outcome. This means Marxian democracy believes in substantial democracy. They believe in substantial justice and they do not believe only in procedural justice. That is the point you need to understand. Right. So the focus of Marxian thinkers, the focus of Marxian democracy is on substance of democracy, on substantive democracy, rather than on the procedural aspect of it. All right. Now, so this is in nut and shell. What is the Marxian view of democracy? What is the Marxian concept of democracy? More details when we discuss Marxian thought. All right. So at that point of time, you would come to know. Right now, so far as Marxian concept of democracy, not more than this is required. Now, try to look into the critical aspect of Marxian concept of democracy. Right. The China calls it as real democracy. Because what we have believed, we have brought about the socio-economic change in society. People are not starving in China. We have been able to convert population into a resource. We have made available to the people, we have given to the people access of all the amenities of life. We have given them access to education. We have given them access to health facilities. All right. We have given them access to the social insurance. So they call our democracy the real democracy. All right. But the thing is, when we talk about democracy, we do not only talk about this. Now I'm talking about the criticism of the Marxian theory of democracy. So when we talk about democracy, we do not only talk about the economic aspect of democracy, we would be also talking about the political aspect of democracy. We would be talking about right to freedom. We would be talking about liberty. We would be talking about freedom of speech and expression. And if you look into how the systems, how the governments are working in communist countries, how the government is working in China, or how the government is working in Russia, or how the government was earlier working in Soviet Union, so you will find that they have not given liberty and freedom to the people. So they are talking about the economic aspect of democracy, okay, but they are not talking about the political aspect of democracy. They are not talking about the freedom. They're not talking about the rights of the people. All right, they're not talking about the rights of the people. So they're not talking about the freedom of the press. They are not talking about the freedom of the media. All right. So they are not talking about decentralization of power. Rather, the power is centralized in the hands of the Communist Party of China. So there, the system is more centralized. And when the systems are more centralized, it cannot be democratic. All right. So there is no reference of decentralization of power. So that's not a real democracy. All right. Again, they have talked about democracy from the class angle. they have talked about the class conflict. But if you look into how the communists, how the Marxian systems have functioned in the country, it is quite unfortunate that Marxism or the Marxian concept of democracy, okay, has virtually failed. In Soviet Union, it has failed. It has failed in China, and not only it has failed in Soviet Union, China, wherever Soviet Union tried to export communism, all right, all those countries have now adopted a parliamentary democracy. So the communist concept of democracy or the Marxian concept of democracy have not been able to see the real light of the day. There was a time, and Soviet Union could not keep itself united. All right, there is a lot of poverty in Soviet Union. It was there in Soviet Union. Now in Russia, there is a lot of poverty. All right. So if you look into the Marxian concept of democracy, what we find is that to some extent they have provided the economic democracy, but they have not provided political democracy. So this is a major criticism of the Marxian concept of democracy. Right. So the real democracy is basically an amalgamation of both economic democracy and the political democracy. It believes in coexistence of political democracy as well as economic democracy. And in the absence of either of them, you cannot call the system democracy. All right. So that is about the Marxian concept of democracy. Now, let us try to understand now the another contemporary theory of democracy, and that is Macpherson, MACPHERSON, Macpherson's theory of democracy. And you can expect a question on Macpherson's theory of democracy also. It is an important theory. Right? Macpherson's theory of democracy is also known as a radical theory of democracy. Basically, the Macpherson theory of democracy, Macpherson has drawn in ideas, some ideas from the liberal theory, some ideas from the Marxian theory, some ideas from the elitist theory, some idea from the police theory, and he has come out with a radical theory of democracy. All right. And it's he's a contemporary exponent of the radical theory of democracy, and we'll look into his theory. Just give me a minute. So Macpherson is a contemporary exponent of a radical theory of democracy. In fact, he has broadened I have told you, he has incorporated different ideas, and he has broadened the concept of democracy. And he has redefined the concept of democracy based on his own experience, based on his own studies and based on his own experiences. He has redefined the term democracy. And the name of his book, all right, the book which he wrote in 1966, and as the title of the book itself reveals, he calls it Real World of Democracy. Try to understand the point. The title of the book, written by Macpherson, in which he has explained his radical theory of democracy, the title of the book is The Real World of Democracy. All right. What are his arguments? Before we go into the detail, his arguments are that liberal capitalist society, they believe that just by granting universal suffrage or just by granting people the right to vote, right, to select the leaders, to select among the different political parties, and just by providing civil liberties and certain rights to the people, they cannot exercise, they cannot claim, they cannot get an exclusive claim over the idea of democracy. I'll repeat this point, what he says. He says that, who? Macpherson, where in his book, The Real World of Democracy, when it was written, 1966, you need to remember all this. What he says. He says, liberal capitalist society, by just granting people the right to vote or right to universal suffrage. For what? That they have a right to select their rulers, have a right to vote, and wherein they can select the rulers by giving them a say in selection of the rulers, and by granting them certain civil liberties, by granting them certain rights. They cannot exercise exclusive claim over the idea or over the title of democracy. On what basis liberal democrats, they claim that they have developed a theory of democracy? What is the basis? The basis is two. One, they have given certain rights to the people, they have given certain rights and freedom to the people, number one. And number two, they have given people the universal right of universal suffrage, or they have given people the right to vote. Just on these two bases, just on these two criteria, can you claim? Macpherson says absolutely no. They cannot claim over the idea of a democracy, because democracy doesn't belong to liberal democrats. In nut and shell, Macpherson says democracy doesn't belong to the liberal democrats. What he's trying to say, let us go into the details of his theory. All right. Now, in fact, Macpherson has studied different theories of democracy, right? He has looked into the philosophical dimension of the theory. The philosophical dimension means what kind of democracy would be the real democracy. He has looked into the philosophical dimension of theory, and he has also looked into the empirical models. Empirical models means existing. He has looked into the working of democracy in different parts of the world. So he has looked into the philosophical dimension of democracy, and he has also looked into the empirical models. Empirical means how the system is working, the actual working. Empirical means scientific. Empirical means actual working of democracy. So he has looked into the philosophical aspect of the theory, and he also looked into the empirical dimensions of the theory. Right. And then he came out, this means he has looked into and he has tried to combine the empirical dimension and the normative dimension. Normative dimension means what should have been or what should be, what ought to be. So he has tried to combine the empirical dimension of the theory, democracy theory, and the normative dimension of the theory of democracy. So Macpherson theory is called radical theory because it is a beautiful amalgamation of the empirical aspect and the normative aspect of the theory of democracy. Okay, let us go into the details of his theory of democracy, how he's trying to explain. Right. The first point I have already explained earlier, that liberalism cannot claim a monopoly over the theory of democracy. I told you earlier, just by granting people right to vote and just by giving them certain rights and freedom, you cannot claim that liberals cannot claim that they have a monopoly over the concept of democracy. Okay, so the first important point about the Macpherson theory of democracy is that liberalism cannot claim a monopoly over the theory of democracy. This is the one. Second point is that what Macpherson says is there could be other models of democracy also. See, liberals, they are claiming that only their model is the model of democracy. No, Macpherson says there could be other model of democracy as well. He says there could be socialist model of democracy, subject to the condition that this means there could be a socialist model of democracy. Macpherson says liberal democracy is not the only model. There could be other models of democracy. And he says even the socialist model of democracy could also be there. Why? He says that the country where the communism is there or the socialist system is working, even when there is a single party, see, in China there is a single party, in Russia also there is a dominance of the single party. All right. So what Macpherson is saying, even the countries who are ruled by the single political parties, there is no multi-party system, there is no dual party system, there is no multi-party system. Even a country like China and even a country like Russia can claim their system to be democratic, provided there is an intra-party democracy. Maybe there is only one political party, but there should be democracy. There should be intra-party democracy. Means everybody should have a right to participate. Everybody could participate in the political process. Everybody could become everybody could claim to become a leader. Means, see, why China we cannot call democracy? Because there is a predominance of a communist party and there is no intra-party democracy in China. All right. The current president of China has got absolute predominant control. All right. And there is no freedom for the other leaders, all right, to compete with the current Chinese president. That kind of freedom is not there. So there is lack of intra-party democracy. What Macpherson is saying, even a one-party state would claim to be democratic provided there is an intra-party democracy. So Macpherson says there cannot be a single model of democracy. There can be a different model of democracy, and even the communist system can claim to be democratic provided there is an intra-party democracy. All right. Now, you see, in India, even though we had adopted a parliamentary democracy form, but for quite a longer period of time, there is a predominance of the Congress party in India. So when there is a predominance of the Congress party, if you look into the years from 1947 till 1967, almost for 30 years, it was only 1967 for the first time that in many states, the opposition party government came to power. But from 1947 to 1967, there was absolutely one party dominance. But there was an intra-party democracy. There was a regular election in the country. All right, there were other political parties also there participating. So just because of there is a single party predominance, you cannot call the system undemocratic. So this means India having a predominant Congress party for over 30 years was also an example of a different kind of democratic model. Right. Macpherson says that in many developing countries, according to Macpherson, there is a one-party dominance model. All right. But the parties, there is an election and the parties, they enjoy it. For last 15 years in Bangladesh, Awami League is in power, last 15 years. Does it mean that you will not call Bangladesh a democratic country? No, try to understand the point. What Macpherson is saying, in many developing countries, there is a single party dominance over a longer period of time. This does not make the system undemocratic because there is a plurality of political parties that are existing in the country. Okay. So Macpherson says even the Western democracies who claim themselves to be the ideal democracy, they are not democracy in the real sense of the term. They are not egalitarian. There is a widening disparity among the people. You try to understand, rich in the capitalist society, rich is becoming richer. All right. So there is a widening disparity. There is a lack of equality even in the capitalist society. So according to Macpherson, even the liberal capitalist society, they cannot claim to be real democratic in the real sense of the term. All right. So Macpherson talks about, he says democracy is all about empowerment. Try to understand. Macpherson says, first of all, I told you that there cannot be a single model of democracy. Even a communist system can claim to be democratic provided there is intra-party democracy. And it says even in many developing countries, there is a single party predominance. But there is a fair opportunity for every other political party. All right. So that is also a model of democracy. This means liberal democracy or capitalist democracy cannot claim to be the only model of democracy. There could be different models of democracy. Right? Now, McPherson says democracy should be leading into people's empowerment. If real democracy is the one in which people gets empowered, and that is why we call his theory a radical theory of democracy, because he believes in empowerment of the people. And liberal democracies are not the real democracy, because it has not led, it might have provided some rights and freedom to the people, it might have given people the right to vote, but it has not led to people's empowerment. So the real democracy is one where the people get empowered. Now, so it says that whether a system is democratic or not, it will all depend on how the power is used in that state or the power is used in that society. He talks about two kinds of power. So when we study the concept of power, again, we'll have to study McPherson's view of power. I've told you earlier that there is a lot of repetition in the syllabus. So if you have done McPherson's theory of democracy, this means you have covered McPherson's theory of power. All right. So that is the convenience of PSIR optional paper. So there is a lot of repetition in the syllabus. So McPherson talks about two kinds of power. He says there is an extractive power, okay, and extractive power means coercive power, and there is a developmental power, right? What he says, how the power is used. Any society in which power is used for development of the people, which we call developmental power, right? Developmental power means power is used for enhancing the capabilities of the people. Try to understand the point. The power, when it is used for enhancing the capability and ability of the people, we call it developmental power, because that leads to people's empowerment. All right. So this is developmental power. Now he says whether the system is whether there is a maximum amount of development, or on that would depend what is the ratio of extractive power and developmental power. Extractive power means coercive power. Coercive power means the power that the state uses for controlling the people, the power that state uses in curbing the freedom of the people, the power that state uses in curbing the rights of the people. That power is called extractive power or coercive power. All right. So, for example, what is the situation in Myanmar? In Myanmar, the state is using coercive power. All right. The state is using extractive power. So, whether a system is democratic or not, according to McPherson, would be depending upon how the power is used. Whether the state is using extractive power or whether the state is using developmental power. Developmental power means power used for enhancing the capabilities of the people. On that would depend. All right. Whether the system is democratic or not. According to McPherson, based on the study that he has made, and based on the research that he has made, he says in Western countries, the capitalists, they have the maximum developmental power and they have maximum extractive power. Now try to understand the point. There has been a development, but there has been a development of the capitalist class only. All right. So the capitalists, they have a maximum extractive power and have a maximum developmental power. This means the working class, the poor class, they have neither the developmental power nor they have the extractive power. All right. So the system cannot be called egalitarian. Try to understand the point. The capitalist class, the capitalist system in Western capitalist democracy or in Western countries, what you find that the capitalists, they have maximum extractive power also, and they have maximum developmental power also. And the poor class, the working class, they neither have the developmental power nor they have the extractive power. Extractive power is the monopoly of the capitalist class, and developmental power is also the monopoly of the capitalist class. This means working class, they have no power. Neither they have the extractive power nor they have the development power. Right now. So he says that Western system could be democratic only when they move from a situation when nobody has the extractive power and everybody has a developmental power. Now, try to understand why. I'm just quoting what Macpherson has said. He said Western democracies should move to a situation where nobody has extractive power, means nobody is able to exploit anyone, nobody is able to coerce anyone, all right, and everyone has equal developmental power. Means Western democracy would be democracy only when they move to a situation when nobody has extractive power and everybody has developmental power. The only then a system would be egalitarian, only then there would be equality in society. That is the real theory of democracy. So this means there is a lot of similarity in the views of Amartya Sen and Macpherson. You remember what Macpherson had said when we were talking about the Macpherson's theory of it, when we were discussing Macpherson's view on equality, what he had said. Macpherson said the real equality is the one when you are using, when state is using his power for enhancing the capability of the people. So there is a lot of similarity in the views of Macpherson and the Amartya Sen. All right. So real developmental power is when people have when the power is used for enhancing the capability of the people. That would be the real democracy. All right. Now, Macpherson is basically attacking both the models of democracy. Macpherson has attacked the pluralist model of democracy also, and Macpherson has attacked the elitist theory of democracy also. Both the models he has criticized. All right. Because he has criticized pluralist model, elitist model, and also the utilitarian model. All the three models. Utilitarian, what is utilitarian model? Maximum and greatest happiness of the greatest number of people. It means you are sacrificing the interest of the minorities to provide happiness to the majority. So he's critical of all the three models of democracy: pluralist model, elitist model, as well as the utilitarian model. All right. Now, what are his arguments? He says that the classical theory of democracy, the first one which we had discussed, see, the classical model of democracy was erected on a moralistic foundation. All right. Because why we call it a moralistic foundation, the classical model of democracy? Because they talk about natural rights, the rights which people ought to be given. All right. They talk about the people, they are rational by nature. They talk about the people are cooperative by nature. People have been enjoying certain rights in the state of nature, and people should continue to enjoy those rights. Right. So they are using the democracy only in the sense of providing certain rights to the people. All right. So they have given a moralistic dimension of the concept of democracy. All right. So he says that they have given a moralistic dimension to democracy that is appreciable. But the point is that theory is not democracy because it has not led to people's power. Okay, that is what Macpherson says. While criticizing the pluralist and elitist model of democracy, what Macpherson says that both the pluralist model and the elitist model of democracy, they are just trying to support the capitalist model. They are a status quo model. So they are not talking about empowering the people. They're talking about maintaining the status quo. Right? They're not talking about change. Right? They're not talking about giving. They are not talking about giving empowerment to the people. They are just talking about maintaining the status quo. So both the pluralist theory and the elitist theory, and so they have less they have left humans. They have left humans in. They have left humans at the mercy of state and the market. That is the point. What McPherson is saying, humans have just been left in the capitalist theory. Humans just have been left at the mercy of, because the capitalist theory tries to give maximum freedom to the market. All right. So what McPherson is saying, that the humans have been left at the mercy of the state and the market. All right. So this is not a real theory of democracy. All right. Norman Berry, while talking about, while making a comment, Norman Berry, while making a comment on McPherson theory of democracy, what he's saying is that instead of giving a new model of democracy, this is a criticism. Norman Berry, Norman Barry. This is a criticism of the McPherson theory of democracy. He says that McPherson has evaluated the existing theory of democracy. What he's trying to say, I'm not getting a word. What he's saying is that he has tried to mix different models. Instead of giving a new model of democracy, see, elitist theory have given a new explanation of democracy. All right, pluralists have given a new explanation of democracy. They have given a new model of democracy. What Norman Berry says, instead of giving a new model of democracy, what he has done, he has referred to different models of democracy, criticized them, and he has tried to mix them in one model. Instead of giving a new model, instead of giving one model of democracy, what he has tried to do, he has tried to mix different models altogether. All right. So this is the major criticism of the McPherson theory of democracy. But more important for us to understand is, you could be asked to do a comparative study, because McPherson's theory of democracy, or McPherson, is not a theory of democracy, rather it is a commentary on his concept of democracy. No. It is basically an amalgamation of different theories, or not actual theory of democracy. All right, this is what you can write in the criticism. But yes, he has tried to explain that nobody could claim its predominance on any model. So there could be different model of democracy, and so far what he has said seems to be correct. Now let us try to compare a liberal democratic model and liberal theory of democracy, or liberal democracy, and let us try to compare it with a radical democracy as given by McPherson. So I'm just doing briefly a comparison between liberal democracy and radical democracy given by McPherson. All right. So what is a liberal model of democracy? Liberal democracy, in fact, it is a combination of, liberal democracy is a combination of the idea of democracy and the ideology of liberalism. That means there are a lot of common things between the two. So liberal democracy is nothing but an amalgamation of, or a combination of, ideology of liberalism and ideology of an idea of democracy. Amalgamation of the two. All right. So far as radical idea of democracy is concerned, it had tried to give a moralist dimension to the idea of democracy. Macpherson has tried to give by trying to explain that real democracy would be one in which people's capabilities get enhanced. All right. It is talking about the developmental power of the people. All right. So by giving an explanation of the developmental power and enhancing the capabilities of the people, Macpherson has tried to give a moralist dimension or a humanist dimension to the idea of democracy. About liberal democracy, I said, it is basically a combination of ideology of liberalism and the idea of democracy. About Macpherson, I said, about radical democracy, I said, it is basically an attempt to give a moralist dimension or a humanist dimension to the idea of democracy. Right. Why? Because what Macpherson says that liberal democracy has just been converted into, by looking into the working of democracy in different, liberal democracy in different parts of the world, what he says, liberal democracy has just been converted into the rule of the powerful people. So democracy has become an instrument in the hands of the powerful people. So instead of becoming a source of human emancipation, try to understand the point. Why we call it this theory radical democracy? Because it says that instead of becoming an instrument of human emancipation, liberal democracies have become itself an instrument in the hands of the powerful people. All right. So rather, what is required or what should have been that democracy should have become an instrument of human emancipation, which is not there. And that is why we call this theory a radical theory. All right. Again, when we compare liberal democracy with the radical democracy of Macpherson, what we find is that in liberal democracy, there is a greater focus on the procedural aspect of democracy. The procedural aspect of democracy means you're talking about free election, you're talking about guaranteeing right to freedom and right to equality to the people, right? Basically, you are trying to establish a political system in which there is a process of election, in which you are guaranteeing freedom and rights to the people. So basically, liberal democracy is based on the procedural aspect of democracy. All right. But as we have discussed earlier, when we compare with the radical democracy of Macpherson, the focus is on substantive aspect of democracy. Substantive aspect of democracy means how a system could be called democratic in the real sense of the term. The systems could be called democratic in the real sense of the term when a system which leads to empowerment of the people by enhancing the capability of the people. So the focus is in radical democracy. Focus is on substantive issues, on substantive aspect of democracy, empowerment of the people. Whereas in liberal democracy, the focus is on the procedural aspect. All right. Now, other comparison could be, all right, liberal democracy promotes extractive power. As we have studied earlier, extractive power means those who are in power, they are exercising control over the masses. So the focus is on extractive power. But in radical democracy, the focus is on what? The focus is on the developmental power. That is the difference. All right. Again, we can say liberal democracy, the focus is on quantity, because you talk about giving everyone the right to vote. You talk about giving everybody, giving the freedom and liberty and rights. So the focus is on quantity in liberal democracy, but in radical democracy, the focus is on quality. It is a qualitative improvement. We are talking about the qualitative democracy. We are talking about people's empowerment, and we are talking about enhancing people's capability. So Radical democracy is qualitative and liberal democracy is quantitative. All right. So that is the a brief comparison if you are asked a question on liberal democracy and radical democracy. All right. Now, so that is all about different theories of democracy. All right. So we have discussed different theories. We have discussed elitist theory of democracy. We have discussed classical theory of democracy, elitist theory of democracy, pluralist theory of democracy, Macpherson's theory of democracy, which is a radical theory. So we have discussed different, and we have also discussed the Marxian theory of democracy. Now, one more concept I would like to explain now. It is called post-truth politics. It's a new concept, and post-truth is a challenge to democracy. P-O-S-T, post-truth, post-truth politics as a challenge to democracy. Before we discuss the different models of democracy, representative model, deliberative model, and the participatory model, 3 models of democracy. And that would bring an end to the topic of democracy. It takes about 3 to 4 lectures every time. And probably, I think this is the 3rd lecture on this topic, if I remember it correctly. Let us try to understand post-truth politics, the concept of post-truth politics. Why? Because post-truth politics is considered as a challenge to democracy. All right. What is post-truth? In the year 2016, if you look into the Oxford Dictionary, in 2016, a new word was added in the Oxford Book of Dictionary, and the term was the word was the post-truth, P-O-S-T-truth, post-truth. What is post-truth, and what is post-truth politics? So in 2016, post-truth concept became very prominent. All right. So they can ask you question, what is post-truth? So you should be knowing the concept. In a democracy or any other form of government, but more in democracy, when a situation comes, when objective facts become less important, they become less influential in shaping the policies of the government, then appeal to emotions and the personal belief. I'll repeat this point. When a situation comes in democracy, when objective facts, when facts become less important, they become less significant. When facts are paid less attention while making public policies, then the emotional appeal, when emotional appeals become more important, when slogans become more important, when slogans become more important in democracy than the facts, when slogans become more important, when emotions become more important, then the price rise, the deteriorating economy, decline in purchasing power of the people. These are the broad realities. So in democracy, when the realities, the existing realities, they are not paid any attention, they become less significant, they become less important, and emotional appeals become more important. All right. Vocal for local becomes more important. All right. Tiranga Yatra becomes more important. Slogans of nationalism becomes more important. All right. When concept of Atmanirbhar Bharat becomes more important, then the actual ground realities. All right. Means when there is a more emphasis on emotions than the facts, all right, such a situation would be called post-truth politics. What is post-truth politics? when existing realities becomes less important, right? And slogans, emotional appeals become more important because they subserve the interest of the people. They serve the interest of they subserve the interest of the government. They help the government in perpetuating the rule. They help the government in diverting the attention of the masses from the real issues. That concept is called post-truth politics. All right. Means when social media is used for promoting a vested agenda, or when social media is used for promoting a vested interest, right? When the focus is more on culture, when the focus is more on religion, when the focus is on falsehood, all right, focusing on attractive slogans, means in order to distract the attention of the masses from the real issues, emotional issues are given more importance. That situation would be called, that situation would be called post-truth politics. All right. So this is a concept, and I just wanted to make you aware of that. Maybe you are asked a question on that. All right. Let us start with representative model of democracy. In fact, democracy just has been reduced to a representative model. The real democracy comes from the two words, demos and kratos, which means power of the people. So in democracy now these days, there is no talk about empowering the people, but democracy has virtually been converted into a form of government in which people rule themselves directly or indirectly through their representatives. So what is democracy? Democracy is a form of government in which people rule themselves either directly or indirectly through the representative. This means when you have selected your representative, when you have participated in the election, all right, when you have chosen your representative, and that representative is exercising power on your behalf, that is sufficient for democracy. That is called representative model of democracy. So representative model of democracy is a base of the contemporary model of democracy. We all understand that. All right. Now we have also understood why we are now talking about the representative model of democracy, because direct citizens participation or direct citizens rule is no longer a possibility because of the increased number of people, all right, because the increased number of people, increased population of a society of different countries. So direct participation, it is no longer possible. It was possible only in Greek city-state of Athens, and it's no longer possible that people should be exercising control or people should be directly taking any decision. That is no longer possible in democracy. So direct democracy is ruled out. So what is alternative? The alternative is an indirect democracy, and indirect democracy is what? That you are selecting your representative. So this has given a credence to what we call the representative model of democracy, because direct democracy is no longer a possibility. All right. Now, means in representative models of democracy, or the other term that is used for this is people's representative model of democracy. What we find is that politicians in this model, politicians, they serve as a people's representative. Who is representative in representative model of democracy? Is politicians, they are the representative. So politicians belonging to different political party, they serve as a representative of the people in representative model of democracy. All right, now. So what happens in representative model of democracy? That representative means a politician whom you have voted. He is working as a link between two separate entities. And what are the two separate entities? The two separate entities are government and the governed. Right to understand the point. There are two separate entities in democracy. One is the government, another is the governed, or the rulers and the ruled. Government and the governed are two separate entities, and representative is working as a via media in representative model of democracy, representative is working as a link between government and the governed in representative model of democracy. Now, but what is the issue? What is the problem? The problem is because of the fact that capacity of the politician to truly represent the masses has been put into the question now. Whether politicians are truly capable, or whether politicians are really capable in representing the interest of the masses, that is a question mark on that. So that is why representative model of democracy has been put to a question, because the person whom you have selected as your MLA or as your MP, member of parliament, whether they can truly represent your interest or not. Try to understand. Whether a politician is representing the interest of his political party or he is representing your interest, there is a question mark for that. The point which I am trying to make is that politicians, they serve as a link, the political representative, they serve as a link between two separate entities, government and the governed. But there is a question mark about the capacity of politicians to truly represent the masses. That is beside the point. How can a one member of parliament can represent approximately 10 lakh of population, and whether he is able to represent them or not in true sense of the term, there is a question mark. Right. Now, means in representative model of democracy, it is presumed in representative model of democracy that the political representative, you call them MLA or MP, they are the one who knows the masses and who knows the masses' interest better than any other person. You try to understand the point. What is the basis of this representative model of democracy? The basis of the representative model of democracy is that the political representative, whether you're MLA or a member of parliament, he is the one who knows the masses well and who knows the masses' interest well. So that is the basis. Right. Now, another basis of representative model of democracy is the election. Election is the another fundamental thing in the representative model of democracy, because it is through election that people, they exercise their right to vote. It is during the election that people, they exercise the right to vote, and it is through election that they elect their representative. So the first basis of representative model of democracy is that representative is the one who knows the masses and masses' interest, number one. And second basis is the system of election, because election is the medium through which people use the right to vote to elect their representative. Right. So there is a question mark. Why there is a question mark about that? Because there is always a doubt that political representative can truly represent the different segment of the masses. See, the whole society gets divided into different religion, different castes, different languages. So how can and to what extent a political representative can represent the diversified segments of the society? That is the question mark. All right. Now, so this is the representative model of democracy. Now, in representative model of democracy, I'll be talking about two models. The first model would be the model given by Edmund Burke, EDMUND BURKE, Edmund Burke, BURKE, Edmund Burke. The first model is called enlightened model. Enlightened, all of you understand. So the first model is called enlightened model. So what is the enlightened model given by Edmund Burke about democracy? Sorry. What is the Enlightenment model given by Edmund Burke? Edmund Burke says representation is a moral duty. Means, in what sense is a moral duty? Because the representative who is representing the masses, he should be representing the enlightened conscience of and the majority and the mature judgment. No, try to understand the point. What is saying that a representative in representative model of democracy should be representing the enlightened conscience of the people. He should be conscience, all of you understand. So what is saying, the representative should be such. He should be matured. He should be a very matured person. He should be able to make a mature judgment. And he should be representing the conscience of the people. He should be representing the enlightened conscience of all the people whom he is representing. That is what is the enlightened model of democracy. He says, and Edmund Burke has given some good requirement, good prerequisite for the enlightened model of democracy. It says, people with good education, all right, people with, what happens in representative model of democracy according to Edmund Burke, it says that people with good education and people with good fortune. This means the politicians who are representing you should be having a good education. We presume that representatives are the one who are having the good education, and they are the fortunate people, and they are representing the interest of those who are less fortunate. What Edmund Burke is saying is that representative, first he said that it is a moral duty. Why it is a moral duty? Because as a representative, you are representing the conscience of the people. All right, the combined conscience of all the people. All right. Now he says that representatives should be representing the conscience of the people, and he says people with good education and fortune, they should be representing. They are representing people who are less fortunate. Okay. Number two. He says representative model of democracy should not be concerned only with the local issues, but rather they should be representing the national interest rather than the local interest. This is a very important point. This means a member of parliament in Lok Sabha, he should not only be representing his own constituency. Try to understand the point. A very valid point has been raised by Edmund Burke. He says the political representative should not only be concerned with the local issues, rather his approach should be national. All right, he should not sacrifice the national interest to the local interest. This is a very important point. Means a member of parliament should not only be representing his local constituency, but he should also be representing his nation. For him, a feeling of nationalism is more important. For him, India is more important. India as a whole is more important than any local constituency that he is representing. So he says that in representative model of democracy, according to Edmund Burke, what is described as a enlightened model of democracy, representatives should be representing not only the local interest, but should also be representing the national interest. That is very important. The second model, and which is again an enlightened model 2, we call it enlightened model 2. Enlightened model 1 is the model given by Edmund Burke, and the second enlightened model is the one which is given by J.S. Mill. What J.S. Mill has to say about the enlightened model 2. See, in fact, one of the important torchbearer of the representative model of democracy was the J.S. Mill. because he was the one who was the strong proponent of extending the franchise to the working class and women. Before J.S. Mill, okay, the right to vote, right to franchise was meant only for the property class. It was not even given to the women. But J.S. Mill demanded, because he was the strongest proponent of extending the right to franchise to the working class, and also to the women. So he talked about giving the right to vote to the working class, men and women. All right, this is the one. What J.S. Mill said about the enlightened model 2 that we are discussing is he rejected the idea that all political ideas have an equal value. No, try to understand the point. He said that different political parties, different representatives we have, they have the they have their political ideas. But he says all the political ideas, they have the equal value. He rejected that. He said that all the political ideas, they do not have the equal value. And he says the political ideas of the educated class, the political ideas of the educated politicians, the political ideas of the educated people, they are worth more important. Political ideas of the educated people and political ideas of the educated politicians, they are more important than the ideas of the illiterate people. This means he's trying to divide the population into the educated class and the illiterate class. And according to J.S. Mill, his second model, the enlightened model 2, what he's saying is that the political ideas or the political viewpoints of the educated people, they are far more important than the views of the illiterate people. That is why he has proposed a pluralist system of voting. Now, what is the pluralist system of voting in the election as suggested by J.S. Mill? I'll be giving you some points for that. First point that you should be trying to understand is that J.S. Mill was a proponent, was the one who believed, who fought for extending right to franchise to the working class and the women. And second thing, he said that the views of the educated people are far more important, and this would be given a far more weightage, okay, and the views of the illiterate people. This means he was in favor of giving more voting rights. The value of votes of the educated class should be more than the value of vote of the working and the illiterate class. Means value of vote of the educated class should be more than the value of vote of an illiterate class. How? He's saying that those who are the diploma and degree holders, they're voting, those who are diploma and degree holders, their value of their vote should be 4 to 5. If they give one vote, that should be equivalent to 4 or 5 votes. What J.S. Mill is saying, that diploma, the weightage of vote of diploma and degree holders should be 4 to 5, number one. Those who are the skilled workers, have some professional qualifications, who are the skilled workers, the weightage of their votes should be 2 to 3. And those who are the ordinary workers, those who are the illiterate workers, the value of the vote should be 1. Which means the value of diploma and degree holders in society should be 4 to 5. The weightage of vote of skilled workers should be 2 to 3. And the weightage of vote of the illiterate ordinary workers should be 1. This means what he's trying to say, he's trying to give more weightage to those voters when they select the representative, when they elect the representative, those voters who are more educated. So this is known as enlightened model 2. All right. And again, J.S. Mill says, once a representative gets elected, like, he should not sacrifice his judgment for to his constituency. Again, whatever was said by Edmund Buck is trying to repeat. I just says that once a representative gets elected, he should not sacrifice his judgment, he should not confine his judgment, should not confine his viewpoints only to his own constituency. This means he should not sacrifice the national interest to the interest of his constituency, the viewpoints. So this is the second enlightened model given by J.S. Mill. So we have discussed two models, one given by J.S. Mill and another given by Edmund Burke. So this is the two. First, we talked about what is the representative model of democracy all about. And secondly, we talked about the two viewpoints. What are the major characteristics of main characteristics? I'll just sum up now. What are the main characteristics of the representative model of democracy? You are aware of all these points. First, the representative model of democracy, first important thing, it is based on free and fair election. It is based on free and fair election. It is based on regular election. And it is based on universal suffrage through secret ballots. So, important characteristic of representative model of democracy. First, there should be regular election at the regular level, regular election after every 5 years in a country like India, or after every 4 years in a country like United States of America. So there should be regular election. Secondly, election should be free and fair. And thirdly, election should be based on universal suffrage. Everybody over certain age should be given a right to vote, and it should be elections should be conducted through a secret ballot. Right? Another important point. Electors means voters should be given a wider political choice. A wider political choice means there should be competing political parties. Means you cannot think of representative model of democracy without existence of multiple parties. So there should be existence of multiple political parties which should be competing with each other. In a sense, you are giving different alternative to the people. So existence of multiple political parties provide different alternatives to the. That is another important point. All right. There should be election law. We have election law in the country. There should be election law, and there should be independent election commission to manage the election. Election laws and independent election commission should be there, right? Freedom of speech and association should be there, okay? And availability of unbiased information to the masses. See, on what basis masses would be exercising their right to vote. This means masses should have an access to the information about the performance of the government, about the challenges faced by the people. What is the real situation in the country? For example, in India, we have given people the right to information. That plays a very important role. So, access of unbiased information to the masses. No, what I'm saying, unbiased information means when you give a political slogan, when you make an emotional appeal, that is an unbiased information. So there should be availability of masses should have an access to unbiased information, and based on that, they should be using their choice, right? And there should be the last point. There should be reasonable level of connection, reasonable level of connectivity between representative and the masses. That is very important in representative model of democracy. Because what happens in representative model of democracy, that once the representative gets elected, they are disconnected from the masses. So that is the real challenge. So in representative model of democracy, what is required, and this is the most important characteristic of this model of democracy, and what is that? That there should be there should be reasonable connectivity between the representative and the masses. Okay, so this is all about representative model of democracy and about the advantages and the drawbacks of the representative model of democracy. Very, very briefly, we'll be talking about tomorrow, and then we'll start with the then we'll be starting with the another model of democracy, that is the participatory model of democracy. So thank you everyone. God bless you all. I've taken your 3 extra minutes. I believe you have some other class. Thank you everyone. God bless you all. See you tomorrow. Thank you everyone. Thank you everyone.